Video game cinematography is a unique and interesting topic to study. Games have been attempting to replicate the cinematic quality of movies since their inception. This has allowed for extremely unique and immersive storytelling that even cinema can take a note from. There are a lot of games that come to mind with incredible visuals and cinematography, yet I find in most of these cases the camera movement and visuals are designed to emphasize the game's primary function, gameplay. Due to their nature as an interactive medium, the main focus of video game cinematography is to both immerse the player within the world of the game, but also allow for clearer visibility so they can interact with whatever challenges are on screen. In action and adventure games, the camera moves in and out in a dynamic way to make the players feel like they are climbing, jumping, or acting in whatever way the character does. Horror games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil brilliantly do the opposite, obstructing camera visibility with darkness, fog, or strange camera angles to increase suspense and fear. Silent Hill 2 is no different in its use of cinematography to aid gameplay. However, it's one of the few video games that, like a movie, uses its cinematics to tell a story. The game has an extremely unique visual style, even within its own series. The development crew, Team Silent, sought not to replicate the qualities of other video games of the time, but instead emulate movies and TV shows like Jacob's Ladder and Twin Peaks. So let's get into these specific techniques and the source material that they derived their inspiration from. The camera in Silent Hill 2 has a very distinct quality, in which it floats and moves in a ghostly manner, either rolling, panning, or dollying in an omniscient and impersonal way. This is a camera technique employed to a great degree by director David Fincher. 7 cinematographer Darius Kanji, who worked closely with Fincher, stated, "We wanted to use the wide frame, so even in the tight inner-city locations we could have 2 close-ups at the same time. But we also wanted to be able to move the camera in any direction at any time, without the heaviness of CinemaScope. We wanted the camera to float." The floating camera in Silent Hill 2 does 3 specific things. First, it adds movement, which is one of the pillars of great cinematography. Movement creates interest, even if it's just 2 people standing around talking to each other. Second, it creates disorientation. Take a look at these shots. The environment seems to be moving around the characters, as if the world is in flux. This both adds a dreamy feeling to the visuals, but also a bit of confusion and disorientation. Silent Hill 2 also frequently employs the Dutch angle with its camera movement. The technique originated during the First World War, but was arguably first best employed in the 1920 German expressionist movie, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. In this technique, the camera is tilted at an angle, creating a viewpoint akin to tilting one's head to the side. It is often used to portray psychological uneasiness or tension in the subject being filmed. Combining the floating camera with the Dutch angle effectively produces a visual that is disorienting. This effectively projects the character's inner mental and emotional states outward, making the audience feel as lost and confused as James. Lastly, the floating camera makes us aware of Silent Hill's supernatural presence, as if the town itself is changing and alive, molding itself to the character's inner psychological states. Next up is contrast, the first being between light and dark. Darkness leaves a lot to the imagination. Let's try this. Look at this dark screen, and what do you see? Keep looking, and your mind will start to see things, perhaps, that aren't even there. This contrast between light and dark is a technique straight out of filmmaker David Lynch's toolbox.
I love seeing people come out of darkness.
Most of Silent Hill's gameplay is navigation through dark corridors, the only source of light being the flashlight on James's chest. This darkness intensifies the fear, and when used with the game's incredible sound, it leaves so much to the imagination of the viewer. Just look at how terrifying this moment is, despite no actual monster being visible. By telegraphing danger with radio static, but concealing its enemies in darkness, the game conditions the player to always be on edge. Darkness is also used to create claustrophobia, narrowing the already narrow corridors and making wide spaces imposing, since the only thing visible is whatever the few feet of light catches in front of our character. The little light that we do get acts as a type of searchlight, exposing where the characters are hiding, and much like turning on the kitchen lights to see the roaches scurry away, we might not like what we see. Lastly, light is associated with Mary, as James finds the flashlight for the first time on a mannequin with Mary's clothing on it. And in the lake, the light of the Lakeview Hotel guides James to his final destination. Another technique Silent Hill 2 borrows from David Lynch is contrasting seemingly opposite visuals together, such as people smiling in situations that they shouldn't, or wearing clothing that doesn't fit their environment. For example, Maria, as a manifestation of James's sexual desires, wears red and promiscuous clothing out of line with a town that is so dilapidated and full of monsters. Eddie's appearance too expresses a strange, arrested development that is not in line with his big physical appearance. He looks like a child but ends up being a violent killer. Even the pizza he finds at the bowling alley is strange. Where'd he find fresh pizza in an abandoned town? Similarly, Laura, an innocent child, first appears whilst James is exploring the terrifying halls of the Blue Creek apartments. Laura skips around the hallways without any concern for the monsters that have been terrorizing James. This creates a discontinuity that makes us question what we're seeing. Is Laura really there? Why isn't she scared? Or is there something that James hasn't realized? Perhaps that the monsters are the illusion. By using contrast in this way, we're left with an uncanny feeling that something is, well, off. We can't trust what we see, further unnerving us and making us question the reality of what's going on in Silent Hill. I think framing and composition is Silent Hill 2's most effective way of visually conveying story and theme. While gameplay is usually over the shoulder, it often changes camera angles to both guide the player but also increase the sense of danger. Overhead shots give us a sense of surveillance, making the characters feel vulnerable or insignificant. For example, when we're first introduced to Eddie, he's bent down, turned away from James, vomiting in a toilet. By having Eddie turned away, we don't see his face, so we don't trust him. But by exposing his back to us, he's vulnerable and pathetic. The camera is positioned above and behind James, whose flashlight is exposing Eddie, acting kind of like an interrogation light. So in one shot, we get a sense that Eddie is disgusting and untrustworthy, but also vulnerable and pathetic. This is then kept visually throughout the game. It foreshadows his final scene with James, where he goes nuts because everyone in his life treats him as disgusting and pathetic. He's vulnerable because he's killed by James, and in a final insult, his face is obstructed in his last scene, further demonstrating his insignificance. Wide shots are also used to demonstrate the character's powerlessness against the forces of Silent Hill. Characters are often placed off-center, with most of the composition being taken up by setting. We see this done a lot in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, where the huge halls of the Overlook Hotel dominates many of its master shots. I go into this over great detail in my other video on The Shining, so take a look at that when you're done with this one. By emulating The Shining, Silent Hill 2 creates a sense of foreboding with its environment, making the small resort town omniscient and ever-present. For example, when we are first introduced to Maria, she's by Toluca Lake, and within every shot of this interaction, Toluca Lake takes most of the space and composition. This connects Maria with the in-water ending, foreshadowing that, like the sirens of old, she's misleading James to a watery grave. Speaking about environment, the settings of Silent Hill 2 are some of the most detailed in any game, and movie for that matter. They're dark, dilapidated, and water damaged, giving a sense of death and decay that's in line with the character's emotional conditions. The use of abandoned, highly textured environments is a motif employed by Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky. Tarkovsky was known for creating movies with incredible ambience and a meditative quality. His shots were often elemental, using water, fire, and wind in combination with the static but decaying industrial elements of civilization. Tarkovsky was known for combining a single amplified sound with his textured visuals, which makes for a hypnotizing cinematic experience. In similar fashion, Silent Hill 2 uses the same technique, but combines sound and visual texture with an extremely unique soundtrack. Sound in the game is used to wear down its player, but also to compel them. There is a breathing quality to it that, although unsettling, gives a sense of comfort in its repetition. This creates such a strong ambience that it feels as though Silent Hill is communicating with the player just through its sound design. While I'm not going to claim to know a lot about music, I will say that Silent Hill 2's soundtrack is nothing short of amazing. Taking notes from Angelo Badalamenti in his work in Twin Peaks, Akira Yamaoka, the game's composer, is able to both compel and frighten. I think what makes the score so effective is how it replicates all the visual motifs we've discussed so far, but does so acoustically. There's a floating quality to the music that evokes the feeling of a dream. There's contrast as the songs have both elements of music and noise, terror and innocence, dream and nightmare. Sometimes Yamaoka uses music and sound together, such as After James Learns the Truth. Evoking the feeling of decay and distortion that is visually being presented and linking it with the videotape we just saw. James's truth is distorted, and it's up to us to try to understand it. Silence 2 is just as important as anything else, being its own type of music and soundtrack, creating a feeling of loneliness and isolation. So, since we've covered so much in this video, I'm deciding to split it into 2 parts. Next, we'll see all of these techniques in action with a scene analysis, and take a look at what I believe is Silent Hill 2's most cinematic scene, and possibly the best use of visual storytelling in any game. The second meeting of James and Angela. See you there.